Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 to 8 the time, many of you wanting to talk about the situation in Ukraine, and we shall, but let's get an update on that from the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab. Now, I mentioned Mr Raab's title as Justice Secretary because, in fact, what we must speak of first is, indeed, you can get more of Mr Raab's views on this. He has a large piece in today's Times newspaper, but even the Times has the headline concerning a new jail which has been built. The headline is Pet Therapy, First Names and No Bars for the Residents at a New Jail. That's right. These people will be called residents. They will have cell windows without any bars. Justice Secretary, Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab explains why. Some of my listeners will be rather surprised by this. What's the thinking behind it? Good morning.
Good morning. Well, look, it's part of our plan to build 20,000 extra prison places by the mid-2020s. You talked about things like barless windows. Actually, that's a security measure. It stops the illegal contraband getting in, whether it's drugs, mobile phones or whatever else. But it is also true to say, as well as our big emphasis on punishment and stronger sentencing, which we've just introduced with the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, we also know that most offenders are released into society. And what this state-of-the-art prison has, we're calling it a smart prison, it has a drug recovery wing to increase the abstinence-based rehabilitation from drugs. It's got in-cell technology which can improve the numeracy and literacy, so you don't have offenders sitting in their jail cell with their feet up on a bunk, but they're actually trying to better themselves. It had a bike workshop. It's got a forklift truck training shop, a recycling workshop. Why? Because we know if we get offenders into work, they're much less likely to reoffend. And there are some other stuff around, some, if you like, pastoral stuff, like a family area, so that offenders can lock in with their family and retain those ties. For example, they even have teachers come in to talk about the offender's children. Now, I spoke to one offender who has got a 4-year-old child working in the bike shop repairs bit and has got a Halfords apprenticeship. And it's clear getting off drugs, giving the chance to earn some money, critical to driving down reoffenders, but also giving hope. And he talked to me about the prospects of actually paying some money for his 4-year-old kid who I think he'd not seen in for several years. He's missing that child growing up. We do want to tap in to that positive motivation to get offenders to go straight. And frankly, if I was one of your listeners, and we've all got offenders coming into the community at some point when they're released from prison, I want people who are off drugs, in work, and have got family ties, because they're much less likely to reoffend.
Just to clarify, this jail will house what are called violent offenders and murderers, will it, Mr Raab?
Well, it's a Cat C prison, so what you're really looking at, and of course people go through different prisons at different points.
But it will hold.
It may eventually, although it depends.
This is the Conservative Party, tough on law and order, building a prison that will hold violent offenders and murderers who will be called by their first name. They'll be allowed pet therapy, and their children come round to help do the homework. That's the Conservative Party being tough on law and order, is it, Mr Raab?
It's the Conservative Party. But by the way, it's just in terms of murderers. If anyone's in for life, they wouldn't end up in a Cat C prison.
I didn't say life. You'll know, Mr Raab.
Yeah, but murderers are a big chunk of the murderers.
So there won't be any. So the murderers will not go through this Cat C jail.
If you've got a whole life order, you wouldn't go through.
No. I appreciate that, obviously, but other murderers will as they work their way through the system. I understand. So I say again, this is the tough Conservative Party, tough on law and order. A convicted murderer will be given pet therapy, ability to help their children with homework, be called by their first name, and be able to look out the window.
Now, what you're looking at is...
I'd hate to be soft on crime.
Well, Nick, what you're looking at is offenders who at some point are going to be released, making sure they're off drugs, can get into work, have got the family ties that create a settled pathway into the community. The vast majority of offenders in prison end up released at some point. We can't lock them all up, in which case, as well as tough punishment, and no one believes in that more than me, we're also saying we need to try and create
tough punishment.
No, Nick, don't interrupt. We need to create a pathway into society, so when these people come back into our communities, they're less likely, not more likely, to commit crime. That's the robust, clear-sighted way we protect the public and indeed your listeners.
Mr Raab, what is tough about punishment if you're referred to as a resident and called by your first name? What is the problem with the word inmate, Mr Raab?
Oh, I've got no, I call them inmates. I mean, look,
but they will be called residents, you're aware of that?
I think the prison staff there call them residents to try and break down.
But why not call them inmates? They have committed.
I call them criminals. Yeah,
so you don't agree with that, calling them residents?
Well, do you know what? Actually, there's a good example. If a prison, whether it's is effective in driving down reoffending, and we're introducing the KPIs, the league tables to demonstrate that, then I do want to give a bit of latitude for them to try new things. But the core of the regime, just to be crystal clear about it, is offenders get off drugs. They don't get access to any of these so-called perks that you refer to unless they engage and they behave. They get into training and qualifications. We've just introduced apprenticeships for prisons, and they get into work. They've got to do all the right things if they want to have the entitlements that you described. Okay. But that is the best way to motivate them, give them the hope to turn their lives around. That's got nothing to do with being tough or tender. It's about being effective in reducing crime.
Thank you for all of your background on that. I obviously have to move you to, you're talking about being tough. We have to look at now how this problem in Ukraine have been ramped up with Putin's decision, or his general's decision, to bomb a nuclear power plant. Has that crossed a line in your book, Mr. Raab?
It is outrageous and totally reprehensible. And in particular, I think the fact that the bombardment continued when the Ukrainian emergency services were going to put out the fire. The reports that we're hearing is that there isn't a risk from the nuclear side of things there, but it's clearly a totally despicable act. And that's why the Prime Minister has called for an emergency United Nations Security Council debate, because this is something that ought to concern the world, not just EU, the Americans and the UK.
And of course, it's not your fault nor the Prime Minister, but of course Russia sits on that very council. That rather neuters what it might be able to achieve, surely, Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, I think, of course, Russia would veto any resolution, but that doesn't mean that it can't be brought to the Council for the whole world to express its view.
We hear that President Zelensky wants more fighter jets and other kit. Is the UK stepping up and doing its bit to provide some?
Well, we've already provided anti-tank defence mechanisms. We've already trained thousands upon thousands of Ukrainian troops over many years. We will look at any requests we get very carefully. We want to steel the resolve, and we pay tribute to the courage of President Zelensky and indeed the Ukrainian troops. And we are tightening the financial noose around the Putin war machine. And you can see that with the impact it's had on the Russian ruble, on the Russian stock market, and indeed with the Russian central bank having to double interest rates.
There is some thought that perhaps in the United Kingdom there could have been more sanctions and perhaps they could have moved faster. Can you give us an update on what you and your senior colleague Liz Truss are trying to bring about there?
Well, we've got over 100 entities, including individuals and banks. Usmanov and Shuvalov have been sanctioned overnight. I think this idea that we have gone slower than, say, the Europeans is just wrong. We've sanctioned more Russian banks than the EU, including the biggest bank, Sberbank. We've gone further than the EU in preventing 3 million Russian companies getting access to loans or getting listed in the UK. But look, it's a team effort and we will go further. And I can tell you, Nick, one of the things that I'm going to be coming forward with shortly in terms of further measures is to stop the oligarchs, the kleptocrats, those with links to Putin, coming over to the UK, using our justice system and our libel laws to bring claims to silence authors, academics, journalists who shine a light on that corruption and that abuse. So that's a good example of something further we're going to be doing. And you'll have the Economic Crimes Bill being taken through Parliament in a day on Monday to strengthen the unexplained wealth orders, to make sure we've got transparency around the chain of ownership of foreign companies in the UK.
Roman Abramovich is offloading Chelsea. Usmanov has been sanctioned. He has a considerable stake in Everton. Are the days of Russian money in the Premier League over, in your view, Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, I think you're seeing the effectiveness of the measures we're taking by that behavioural change. Let's just be clear also, though, Nick, we want international money coming into the UK. It's good for jobs, it's good for investment. We're not taking action against all Russians. Our action is targeted at the kleptocrats, the corrupt, the oligarchs, and those with links to Putin. That is the right thing to do. Let's not get jingoistic about it. And it's also the most effective thing to do, because we want to target those who are bankrolling the Putin war machine so that it fails.
How likely is it that possibly some of the many properties owned by some oligarchs in the United Kingdom could be seized?
Yeah, if we've got the evidence and there's the legal basis, we'll do it.
And they could then be used to house Ukrainian refugees, I hear, is an idea from Mr. Gove. Would you support that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at everything in the round. It's a team effort across government, from the Foreign and Defence Secretary through to Michael Gove, and of course the Prime Minister's driving this very hard.
OK, and lastly, one of your former senior colleagues, Gavin Williamson, has enjoyed a promotion. Some of the headline writers are not so sure. Private Pike knighted, shock gong for Williamson despite 2 sackings from government. Were you surprised, Mr. Raab?
Well, I never have advanced sight of those measures, but those awards. But look, he's got a record of public service in Parliament. He's served 5 years in Cabinet, and it's a recognition of that.
Yes, but it is a reward for failure, isn't it, if you're fired twice and you get a gong?
No, I think it's...
Well, God knows what I'd be in for. Sorry, do go on, Mr. Raab.
Well, I can't give you or your listeners any advance sight of that. Although I would think that it's only a matter of time.
Only a matter. But in this, 2 sackings from government and you get knighted. It is strange. Lastly, Dominic Raab.
Well, I think, look, he's got a record of service, of public service in Parliament, 5 years in Cabinet. It's in recognition of that.
Grateful for your time as ever. Justice Secretary, Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab appearing here on LBC 2 minutes after 8. Holly Harris has the news.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's